Welcome to Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. Each week, the NI Bullpen will be covering the world of comics, talking to creators, deep diving into some fantastic stories, and much more. Now let's hand it over to the team and turn a page.
Welcome to a very special edition of Nerd Initiative's Turn a Page, the comic book club where we deep dive into your favorite stories and issues you need to go pick up at the shops. And this is a very monster episode because if you have not had April 3rd circled on your calendar, we're getting to the comic shop and picking up the return to Twilight City. You are doing something wrong, folks. I am so amped up about this. I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ken M. I'm the host of the ODPH podcast, and I'm also Nerd Initiative's comics editor-in-chief. Joining me on this special interview is the dynamic duo of drafts and dialogue, bringing you that pop culture dialogue that you need every single week. It's Matt and Lauren from hopsgeeknews. What's going on?
Up. Hey.
I'm super excited to be here. I've been loving Minor Threats and the Alternates, so I'm just ready to get this interview started.
Yeah, telling me all about it. So let's do this, Ken.
It's a special issue that's going to be dropping April 3rd via Dark Horse Comics. And we are very fortunate to have the creative team behind this book on the show this week to talk about it, Minor Threats and why you need to have that in your collection, the Alternates, and this book, The Fastest Way Down, dropping April 3rd. First joining us, you know him as one half of the co-creators of MODOK's animated series for Hulu and also from MODOK's Head Games is Jordan Blum. Jordan, what's going on?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Also, the co-writer of Minor Threats, The Fastest Way Down. You know his work every time you see him on screen or in wherever you catch the name. You definitely have to go support it, whether it's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Happy, the voice of Matthew the Raven, Ratatouille, and currently in one of my favorite podcasts, Who Is No One, being the voice of Teddy Barstow and solving the Massiverse's biggest murder mystery is the one and only Patton Oswalt. Patton, what's going on?
Hi, guys. Yes, you must support the name. I love that phrasing.
Absolutely.
I'm saying you must support the name.
Yes, indeed. And
thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And last but certainly not least, you know his work from such books as Orchid, Drax, and Deadpool, amongst countless others. It is Scott Hepburn. Scott, what is going on?
Not much, man. Thanks for supporting the name. Be here. Excited to talk about the new book.
Oh, yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
No, we can definitely hear you. And I mean, we have got so much to deep dive into because this whole universe that you have all created really caught my attention. Like we said off air, Lauren has been raving about this for months. Every time we have our group chat, anytime an issue comes out, she's like, have you picked this up yet? Because you guys need to. And obviously the work speaks for itself. But how did the whole story of Minor Threats and the creation of Twilight City come about?
What happened was I had for a Batman story where I wanted to look at, when the Joker breaks up, the standard story, who, as they work their way up the information chain, it's the C-level villains, it's the street villains, it's the basic working class. And then I was talking to Jordan. We had done some work for Marvel. I had done some work for DC. And we were like, are you going to break your ass on the story, be an IP that you own, and ultimately it'll just be one of another? Why don't we create our own universe? With Jordan had this great phrase. Really, it was our kind of one of our guiding beacons, which is let's create a city where 60 years of comic book continuity is there in the background. Need to go into it, explain every single thing that happened, like, after a massive crisis, after some weird interdimensional event, it's repaired. So it's just, and then we decided to build up from there. So again, a major villain kills a major hero's side, and the heroes are coming down like a ton of bricks on the C-level criminals. And what do they decide to do? Well, if we hand this A-level criminal over to the A-level, we get a little bit of credit in the favor bank. We can go back to our lives. I'm not trying to do some weird art alienation crime, some esoteric bit of evil. I want to rob a jewelry store, fence that jewelry, get the money, live high for a while, doing what. So, in a weird way, in a very weird way, they want to bring back law and order. They need the law and order of Twilight City so that they can then bring law and make.
I feel like when we first started talking to Scott, who we had worked on Head Games with, Scott draws DC comics. I can't work with anyone else. How are we going to do this? Is we brought up that like this is a lived in. I think he started pitching of falling kaijus, and we talked about the time bubble stuff. Like it became clear, like, oh, this is going to be the path of comic. It's survive the night in a city that, again, has these things. Every book has some storyline we haven't even seen before to kind of deal with that.
And by the way, there are things that Scott has drawn into the background or just into the dressing that have spawned other stories and ideas, like
other series that we can't talk about. We
can't talk about yet.
Yeah.
That was just, oh, that's a cool thing in the background. And someone, wait a minute, what's that story? There have been a couple of panels, especially in volume 2, where I had to catch up because they are so detailed and so full of visuals. And there have been a couple times I'm like, there's too much this page. But then I realized is what a comic book world with 60 years of continuity would look like. It would be a visual assault, being able to survive, able to take that all in. So I had to catch myself and go, no, he actually took our directive to heart. Mm-hmm. This is what that world.
It helped with like Frankie too, of like, oh, we're going to do a second generation supervillain. There's a whole past, there's a whole Silver Age to this unit we've never seen. And she's next generation after that. So it just kind of implies the history that we like. Cause I think that's the fun of comics, is that we always jump into a story that's backstory to it and kind of excavating that, what happened in the past with investing in kind of what's happened.
Yeah, I think Boys Alone could tell a bunch of stories. I'm sure each one of them has a story of their own.
Yeah. And some merch. We need some Frankie merch.
Yeah, we do.
Yes. It's in the works. We're talking.
Lauren, that's actually I never thought about that. Each of those toys, because a lot of those toys this could have been a little kid, normal childhood, but then every single one of them has been turned toward making a buck with crime. So in a weird way, there's kind of tragedy to these very fantastical toys being used because each one of them is a chance for her to have a normal childhood that's gone.
Right. And from a previous crime.
I never thought, there's a story to be told in all of the toys that she's using.
See, there's another one right there. You said like every little spawns something else. And I'm a little off script.
Okay, I'm sorry. The wheels are going. Sorry. All right,
no,
go ahead. Sorry.
Go right ahead.
A little off script. Actually, what this just spawned a question for me is you guys just talked about how you've worked on Marvel and all these like IPs that aren't your and creative own comic thing right now. What's that kind of like for you guys being able to just build your own universe and run as wild possible store, what have you, and just not have anybody looking over your shoulder?
Well, obviously, we're inspired by a lot of the other creative-owned universes out there. Black Hand, especially Astro City. Astro City hit me like an atom bomb when I first read it. I thought, this is what it would be like if you lived in the D universe. No, you wouldn't know every single player in the game. The only DC book that came close to that was Kingdom. Suddenly 30 years in the future, know half these characters because the world is going so quickly. I can't keep up with what's going on. It was a weird visual analogy to older, and you look at the cover of Rolling Stone or Spin or People magazine and go, oh God, I don't know half these people. What is going? Oh my God. We wanted to have that. Obviously, Jordan and I are very, very circumspect about what goes into our universe. We want to build it, but we to give a sensation of, it's out of control to someone looking at it. There's much too much. And again, not to playing Scott as the artist, very, very easy. There are just so many details going on. And I think it really makes them feel a little uneven under the reader's pick.
Yeah, Scott, from a design point too, what was it like kind of starting from scratch?
It's the version of the job. It's a little daunting to realize there are no templates and there's no model sheets to start with. You know what I mean? In the entire design, guys. So to even begin the book, there's a dozen characters and 5 major an overall design aesthetic for this neighborhood versus that neighborhood, and this type of clothes people have, and this kind of. There's classes. There's like within superhero strata. There's different ages of superheroes and what that would for their weaponry. Different like success rates of villains and heroes, and what that would mean for are they living in a suit that they've had since? Is this a kid who's like sort of emulating an older hero that they saw and twisted in some way? There's a lot of juggling of that stuff, but that's the fun part of designing things. I kind of don't draw anything with it different ways.
Yeah, and there's a lot of visual shorthand in terms of, as you were saying, the different generations for supervillains. There's a point of pride and defiance in still wearing your supervillain outfit, even though you've been arrested multiple times. You're now out on the street. Whereas Frankie's from the nation, which is like, I don't need to wear it. Wore it, got me in jail. I'm, so, and in a weird way, that kind of goes along with a lot of flashiness in the criminal younger generations that are like, no, actually play it. The more low key you play it, the more money you make, the more power. So you see those different generations clashing with each other. It's how, Frankie and Brain Tease kind of butt heads a lot of the times because he is still in that late 60s. You have some flash and some pride in this. And she's like, will you shut the fuck up?
The big ones from, we've read superhero comics our whole lives, and there's always that story that no one's touched yet, right? That is like bring this. And I think for us, we love these goofier Silver Age, Bronze Age villains, who were just meant to be the villain of given these kind of silly gimmicks, and they were gone. And then the Green Goblin comes back for a big major fight. And well, who are these people and what is reality and real life? Taking something that is so kind of big and flashy and kind of goofy and trying to find like you put on a costume to rob jewelry stores and understand kind of the emotion and pathos behind that was like one change. But yeah, what if we focus in the gutter with these characters, that no one really ever spends any time with?
Yeah.
Now, since we've seen so many different variations between Marvel, DC, and the boys, and this goes more into creating your own. So you guys came up with some very unique superpower. So how did some of those superhero powers come about? And Scott, how was that getting to draw these powers for the first time?
That's like, what is the design of a character is visually, how do their powers manifest? If they are project, do they for by propulsion or you know what I mean? Like, is the ground lifting underneath them? You have to make a decision in one way or another. And once you start putting logic behind one, say it's levitation, then that means this kind of costume should be billowing rather than this, or like there's like logic to the design steps that follow from it. It all feels like more organic or more logical steps. Like I try and think of like, this person didn't just pick up a costume from where they response to what they needed a costume to be.
Yep.
And I mean, sometimes there's like just what's a fun looking thing, but as I try and have the function of this character's abilities or reflected in the images.
Mm-hmm.
I think
like Edna Mode.
I think we're also referencing so much to minor threats. We want you to be thinking Flash's Road or, again, those Spider-Man villains or Batman villains. Like there's an era that the power them reflect. Alternate was also very specific. We were like, we want you to be thinking of those DC characters who were sort of oddities that given to Vertigo to take forward and do things with. So we wanted all the powers of the alternates to be those. This one talks to Crumbs and this one has the power of free monster. You're like, this would be that weird thing that someone, Len Wein created in Grant Morrison's like, I will take this and stain with it. Yeah. And that's what we tried to kind of figure out with those characters.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shines through.
The original minor threats are all analogs of minor DC villains, because in my original story, I was literally going to have a hidden joke where the villains that gets together to take down the Joker are literally a C-list. It's Calendar Man, Calculator, Crazy Quilt, Copperhead. So minor threats, their Copperhead is Snake Stalker, and the Crime Doctor is so like there were these weird. What would that look like in a more realistic world? Especially when we gave them way more personality. Force of they've each got their own problems, and how does that affect their design? Scalpel, she's a supervillain. I'd like to bring some couture, for God's sakes. I have expensive tastes, whereas Brain Tease is very much I'm Brain Tease, Brain Helmet to show these are there's different the costumes kind of reflect the personalities.
Brain Tease weirdly reminded one, but it was like a calm, the way he's like thinking and calculating things, like from the books, not from the cartoon or from the show, but how he's just like, well, noticing all these little things, putting them together, but it was like a comical version with an ego, because obviously Thrawn also is not very ego in the book.
Yeah. I think that from like when you have someone like, what challenge can we throw at him at this issue, and how do you always embrace comics as visual medium of like, I can tell you someone things out, but wouldn't it be cooler if I showed you his point of view? Or the same thing with Scalpel and how she diagnoses things, like that was really the cool. Beauty of like, let's embrace the medium, and also Scott's going to take whatever little idea we have and explode it into something way better anyway.
Right. It's a comic book it's a story for being a comic book. Like there's other ways of interpreting spelling and whatever, but we are very intentionally using the medium of comic books for the strengths and the things that it can do best. We're not storyboards for a cartoon. It's a medium of storytelling unto itself that is kind of very powerful in that you can limitless budget and unlimited scale of what you want to do visually, or the complexity is as much as you can cram in to the page. Yeah. And the audience controls time in a way that other mediums don't. So you can something like hours looking at individual pages of comic books that I love from childhood, and almost like anchors that story in your brain deeper, because you've had this like single thing that you love so much just gloss over in time. Yeah. That's kind of what I love about comic books.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. Because it's not like we're simple, and something catches your eye, and then it's going to lead you to everywhere else on the page. And I think that's one of the things that it does really well. It spoke about viewpoints. In both Minor Threats and Alternates, you guys switch up the viewpoints of a lot of the characters. Were there any viewpoints that were easier to write or draw compared to others, or that were just more relatable to each of you guys?
I think there were surprises. Like Scalpel ended up being a character that I didn't think was going to be sympathetic, or like we didn't have all the backstories. We kind of we wanted you to meet these characters as types you think they are. And then with their POV, you get a chance to kind of get in their head and see where they've come from. And I think that was surprising for me. What about you, Patton? Were there any that you were a little character now?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of went out of our way because we wanted to keep attention on the team. Oh, no one can really be trusted. So we really made Scalpel and Brain Tease kind of hateful characters in that first issue. They're not likable people at all. They're very petty. They're very opportunistic. And then when we went into their background, you realize, the reason that they're reacting to horrible things that have been done to them, and they're also reacting to some horrible choices that they've made. And I was very surprised that I actually am rooting for Brain Tease, even though I went out of my way to write him as the biggest dead on the planet, and then you're rooting for him.
But you, Scott, is there one that you were like, I didn't think I'd love drawing this character as much?
Well, I think you could with my secret favorite character. I don't think we should reveal that just yet. We have a new book coming out that everyone will fall in love with. I'm sure it gets announced, but I just the open worlds. Just looking at how we construct this, I have been writing, and to have Jordan and Patton be such experienced writers, and to see the pursuit of mixing and adding layers to it isn't about like mapping everything perfect from page one. It's about learning the characters and building out meaningful story to accommodate it. And really eye-opening, and making me think of storytelling in a whole different way. And the design stuff that I get to do, just thinking about how to like twist the knife a little bit on things to like elevate what moments we're building. And like, maybe we didn't think of this moment from the early issue as significant as it could be, but in the light of what's happened, now we see some character dynamic that's grown from it, and some new character angle, and the way that we're sort of like organically growing our stories together is I don't even remember, but that's what part for me.
Well, I'd love to say we have a master plan and we are executing it perfectly, but I think what the first story was really interesting when we started volume 2, the fastest way down, where it came so organically out of the characters and where we left them, and pieces of story we didn't get to created new story. I think a lot of people really liked the character of Snake Stalker, who was the one character did not get his flashback issue. And I think fans of that character will be very excited by what happens in volume 2. And that even though he is continuing in a big way and it ended up becoming this big kind of plot engine, but out of an emotional place of, we love this character and there's more to him and we get to see. I don't know. It's been one of the most organic processes ever. And then it feeds off Scott's art, which feeding and back and forth. And it's been really fun to kind of stay loose while still having like a map along the way.
So you can
very reassuring to listen to interviews with like Vince Gilligan and Noah Hall. They talk about this, and it's like, we had no idea where this would end up, but we had something in our mind, and then we realized we went, oh no, it'd be different. So, apparently the whole thing bad was something that they did not see coming. Same with every season of Fargo. Like sometimes the path is walking, and that's what happens to us a lot of times when we're writing.
Because you learn more about the characters.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes for the best. It's at the same plan anything. You're not going to get the results you necessarily want. Whereas if you just are like, all right, Jesus, take the wheel, for example, and see where we take this. And I think you guys have just talked about here, it's grown very organically and it's wicked good.
Not to get too hoity-toity, but very much like Pigeon Pete's app in the first Minor Threats. We knew we had a destination. We knew we were always going to get right to Stickman and what's going to happen when they found him, but open how we get there and what they encounter along the way and what that reveals about them. So that was a really cheesy way to answer that question.
Speaking of Volume 2, Jordan, you actually made a comment comparing Minor Threats Volume 2 to Godfather 2. Big comparison for anybody.
Only in quality. Just in quality.
At first I was like, wow, that's big ambitions. And then we actually got to have a little preview and I agree with you.
Oh my God. Well, thank you. No, I was not comparing quality, more of like structure.
I understand. Yeah. I don't think you're too big for your britches, but my
but I think
question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to ask your question. I didn't mean to jump in.
I was just going to ask, had any mafia or mob kind of in writing this story, but I want you to go ahead and say what you were going to say as well.
Yeah, well, it was that going that way where we are huge movie nerds. Patton and I specifically will derail most of our writing sessions to watch something that gets us really excited.
Yep.
And
we will.
Yes, because it's a language, right? Like cinema is a language, and we always have to be comic book supervillainy and crime noir convention. We talked about like everything from The Warriors to Fargo. Losers caught up in biting off more than they can survive the night. What does Volume 2 look like? Well, where did we leave off with Frankie? Well, she's about to declare herself Queen Pin. What are these, heavy is the head that wears the crown kind of stories? And I think that's where we found the big sprawling rise in crime empire kind of stories. So that's where kind of we pull from.
Yeah. And especially dealing with Frankie too. I mean, her powers are so impacted by her childhood and then lack thereof. So in creating her origin, because I think she goes through the biggest progression from Volume 1 to Volume 2. I mean, how did her origin story come about? Or was it the idea that her subconscious was always creating toys?
This is just my take on her. She is growing up the daughter of a supervillain, not a worldwide supervillain, but one that is lived at street level, doing pretty well. You always want to somehow connect with your parents. And it feels like she was left alone a lot with her toys while mom was in jail or doing crime. I think her powers manifested that way. What is the way to impress my mom and gain status in this world? Mom is very, very Queen is very, very aware of status and, comes from that era where that really, really mattered. And epigenetics, man, it gets passed down to kids, whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, I think it's about fighting your nature, too. Like, she has a double gift, and it's such a part of her history and her upbringing and where she came from. And she resents it because it has cost her a lot. but what happens when you're at what you do, whether you do it or not. And I think the first arc is really about her trying to run from it, and the process of running from it, realizing damn good at it, and why fight what you're good at. And we always knew this is a book about villains, so we can't just do a thing where like she's like, no, a book about villains should end with a villain being like, I love being a villain. This is an ode to this love to this world. And we want to keep, I think that's what separates the story from so much of what's out there, is we don't get to see that perspective. So where do we go next in the world? Well, let's see when, Frankie goes when she claims power.
Yeah, I loved her storyline.
That's one thing you just on right there is you don't really a lot of the villain things. And when you do, most of the time that they're busy just okay, how can we make the villains good again? So I think that's one of the things that stands out from this is you guys don't seem to be going that route. It's very much like, these are villains, these are not good people, we're going to keep them on that path. And I think that's one of the things that really makes this story unique. And
she's going to struggle with it. I think there's a lot of dark stuff that happens at the end of the first volume. She kills there's a body count, and we want to make every death count. So even things like the Insomniac, that's not something she just walked away from. That's something she had a relationship with her entire life. It was the guy putting her in jail, and it was this innocent back and forth thing. And she murdered that guy after he tried to murder her. So she's not done with dealing with that.
Right.
And it's not done dealing with her, even more importantly.
Plot thicken.
Now, with the minor threats cameos that we also got in the alternates, however minor they were, right? Do you ever combine these stories more than just cameo? To be standalone nods? Like, what do you guys see in that kind of going?
Our answer is very similar to how we plot these books. We don't know yet. We're just telling each little story and trying to give it the justice that it deserves, and we will see start to fall together. You never know.
And it's creating something that is fun and inviting to other artists, which sometimes if you're working at Marvel and DC, it's so fun to play with the toys, but you can't touch that one. We got Civil War happening over here, invasion over here, and like that, you got to mention that. And like, we wanted to create a space where people could come in and add to the universe without feeling confined to. A great example of like Tim coming in and I want to tell this kind of story with these kinds of characters. And we're like, we know how to, we can loosely tie it in with it being something that any reader can and read the first minor threats. I think some of the spin-offs that are coming out, it's the writers in to connect them more in certain ways. And others are like, I'm going to do my thing in this corner. And we're like, great. Because that's one of these charities is that it's more about, do you have an interesting story to tell from a point of view we've never seen, than make Frankie fit into.
I mean, it is always fun if once you're a fan of something and then you're reading the next thing, you're like, hey, I know, that I call it the Leonardo DiCaprio moment, hey.
You did that in volume 2, right? Like you brought some of the alternates in little ways. Like it was a toy, right?
Yeah, I try and like sneak hints of other things into the background. Anytime, often Jordan and Patton will like where it's like character enters busy room full of crazy amounts of stuff. And then, and then they clap their hands together and walk away. And then,
thanks, guys.
But those are the funnest things to draw. And when you're reading the book, I'm also the cover artist for other books. Like this, we so far have the ultimates and minor threats sort of publicly facing, but there's so much world building and so much exciting stuff happening that I'm still sort of the visual. I'm at the front end of covers and character designs and stuff like that for a lot of things. So I've already got on my table all these other things and character designs, and I can't help but just start mixing it together. It's all, to me, seems like they were beside each other already on my table. I just sort of like shuffle them back and forth a little bit.
It's fun because it's like some writer will be like, fast food restaurant. We're like, oh, Scott created this whole mythology of a bite burger.
Yeah.
Bite burger now. And it's like, because we are this encyclopedia of what's come.
There's like literal menu items that are now part of the universe.
Yeah.
Best.
Great.
We're going to have a pop-up menu somewhere that'll be an installation.
Yeah. If we need Dark Horse Burger pop up, but
Scott, do you ever try? So, like you said, they just kind of like, here, there's stuff in this room. Do you ever throw like Easter eggs and things, or just to like?
I mean, it's only.
Well, do you ever like play with Jordan and Patton at all to be like, all right, let's see if they catch this one, catch this one.
Well, I'm kind of making it up as I go, and those guys pour over everything, so there's no sneaking anything past them. But like, I'm filling rooms, and there's a prison yard, and there's a bar. There's a bell, and there's a rich villains clubhouse, Soho House type environment that's got 100. You just can't help but start self-generating little backstories and connections to things, and like, oh, these three kids have this similar helmet because they probably did this thing together, and that guy's missing an arm from the time that this happened to him, and that other half story that I thought of earlier.
I feel like Scott, like you'll also bring his back. So like, we never asked for cats to have super long tails, but there's clearly some story of something that happened to the cats, or there are these, dead husks of what looked like some sort of poison invasion just littered everywhere that were never scripted, that Scott's like, oh, there's a whole storyline that happened that Scott added to the city that keeps up. Yeah. So it influenced stuff where we loved that there were background side storylines going on. So for volume 2, we just gave like, go over super crime. She waged a war against magic, but we'll never see that story. So there's all these little subplots of like people fuming fairies and stuff. Like they're removing magic from Redport, and we don't know why. We don't know what. Frankie's beefing. Hopefully there's time to tell that story down, but we loved giving like, okay, now Scott can add weird magic removal in the backgrounds, even though it has nothing to do with story going on.
Yeah.
But it also plays into like a good balance to the story. Cause I mean, obviously a story about villains, it is a little dark. I mean, some of the subjects, obviously you're dealing with prejudice against metas, people are getting killed, but you guys do find a way to place good humor moments in the story. Like, does that come real organically, or do you get to a point where it's just like, okay, we just got to kind of lighten the mood up here just for a sec?
Patton takes this stuff pretty seriously, so we push him to put.
No, I mean, I think that a lot of times, I think it's a very, very human thing that when things are very violent and very dark, we will go to humor. And so a lot of times we're not being funny. We're doing it to show this is how people deal with stress. You see a lot of times in volume 1, when people, it looks like a one bed and people, they're kind of joking about, well, it's one less person to split the money with. Like, they are just confronted with horror and tension. Hey, that's your only real.
And I think it's a little bit of a response to this idea that, kind of spawns out of like in 66, that we should be ashamed of the silliness of superheroes, and superheroes should be grim and dark and serious all the time. And my favorite stories are those ones that are like, let's celebrate the silliness and craziness of this while still telling, very adult or even just very story. So I think we all celebrate the craziness of comics and wear it on our sleeves, as opposed to like, they wear costumes, but they're really serious. People and
Batman does his taxes too.
I love the insanity of that. We got to come up with something this week, so that's why Bizarro exists, and that stuff is so fun. So we want just as fun as those Silver, but still, we're telling a little more of a crime noir.
Yeah, because I mean, it definitely shines through the writing and the artwork too. Because like I say, there's just so many different elements going on that, even with how dark the story can get at times, there's still something to kind of really shift gears and really give the reader something to really sink their teeth into. And this is just something that when you go pick this up at the shops, this is going to be something you definitely want to really get involved with, because like I say, the work you're putting in with creating this new universe, I mean, is really giving fans a different perspective about the typical superhero story.
Well, I think that was always kind of the thing we love is like, I love Watchmen. It's great. Not everything has to be dissect comics that way. Whereas I think we want to dissect, but we also want to be like, also let's celebrate the joy and the silliness and stuff. And I think that was always kind of finding that middle ground of like, let's investigate, but have fun.
We like, cool. Yeah. So I have, this question's kind of a silly silly question. I just kind of wonder it when I'm reading comics. So anytime I'm reading like Batman or Wolverine curse word, even if it says "free" on the front, is that nice to actually be able to insert your own curse word and actually write the curse word out?
I also love, again, the format of comics where there's been times where I wish it was just like squiggly lines and dollars.
Yeah,
where there's
I kind of
something
miss those because in a way it makes your mind rise to the occasion and go, what's the worst thing I can say here?
See, I go full like Billy Butcher, and so sometimes it's like
yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's once you get, it's almost like have freedom thing, then it's not that fun anymore. Like you need those restrictions to push against because then it feels dangerous.
Yeah, I think at the same time we sound like they are in Breaking Bad or like these are criminals and they're not good. You know, this is how everyone talks, and that we wanted them to at least feel like they really exist in a crime world.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like when you're.
Oh no, go ahead, Lauren. Go ahead.
It's like watching the Arrowverse, like when the bad guys are like, "Screw you!" You're like, "A bad guy's not going to say that."
That's what I was about to say. Like comic books are silly and fun. This makes me think of just like that. It was like their whole thing is they don't cuss, so their whole is like, "Oh darn," and they're just embracing the silliness. Again, comics are just
that weird way. That was Omar Little on The Wire. His whole thing was he never cursed, and he would chide people for cursing.
Right.
That's right.
It was just this weird thing of like, hey, you don't need to be cursing. You know, he's saying those words out of that pretty little mouth, and then he kills 90.
Yeah.
But he was polite about it.
Speaking of The Wire, I do have one lot because this has been sitting in you guys are all, like you said, are big movie fans and you watch things to get you guys hyped up. Is there a go hype movie to get you just kind of whatever you're feeling at the moment?
We draw some from so many sources. I mean, I think every source we draw from draws from so many sources. So, you know, it's a patchwork for us of shows like The Wire, of comics like Suicide Squad, of movies like Godfather or Layer Cake. Layer Cake is a huge influence on me of the kind of tragedy of let's bring business acumen to our crime endeavor. It's like, guys, this is not you're in the wrong world right now.
Right.
Like, I just love that feeling of it. Also a great movie, Killing Them Softly. Very, very underrated movie about exactly how the criminal underworld works.
Yeah, I would say what's real is I thought I was a cinephile, and then I met Patton, and he has taken up my education, and he's shown me all these noirs from the 50s and 60s, and I feel like that gets really filtered in as well, like seeing these old kind of crime capers. It's ever expanding, but then we'll also pull from like, you know, a Silver Age Justice League book.
Yeah, there's a movie from the late 40s, one of Don Siegel's earliest movie, Don Siegel, who made Dirty Harry, and called The Lineup, with Eli Wallach in there. It kind of sums up this whole world, which is if you're going to live outside the law, you've got to be honest.
Scott,
which was such a great line. It put a Bob Dylan songs. That's how great that line is. But that's kind of the whole basis of this.
Yeah, I was going to wonder, Scott, do you pull? We haven't ever talked about your kind of crime movie, TV stuff. Like, does anything influence you, or do you go more from the superhero world?
I mean, I guess my influence are probably pulled more from other illustrators, but I love. I think if you went through, there's a maybe amount of Wes Anderson sort of compositions throughout Minor Threats. More in the like we back to like a wide stage shot, like a 1-point perspective where we're really seeing everything on a midfield and it's like volume of detail. I planted those throughout, like often when we cut away to a new fun, big sort of environment, but a lot of new visual things to take in. I've put it on like a Wes Anderson sort of shot.
Love that.
But you know, my write a script and then I draw it for like 3 months. So I don't have like a hype movie exactly because it's you know, weeks and weeks and weeks of doing it. But I definitely go through, like I'm rewatching The Wire right now.
Nice.
However it takes to fit about the specific details of The Wire is how frequent The Wire. But me and my wife love the first seasons because she's seen any of it, which is
wow.
I can rewatch Once Upon a Time and once a week. I love it so much.
Love that. Just how
I love movies where you're just in a world and you don't really see what the plot is until movies are great, like Everybody Wants Some or Dazed and Confused, where you're just in the life of these people, and then you get an overview at the end of like what the character work was. Nice Guys, I just watched again.
Oh, that's a great
movie. Didn't Nice Guys make $100 million? Or more Nice Guys.
I was gonna say, like, if there's a movie that deserves a sequel, we need another Nice Guys.
Yep.
There's no need. They could jump into that anytime. Yeah. The tone of Nice Guys is very similar, I feel like, to what the world, our main title anyway, the sort of like energy and the like gritty sort of like just real world boots on the ground, like working stiff, like knocking heads and trying to like do their job of like collecting paychecks. It feels very similar to me. Maybe not in power, but
I think it makes a lot of sense. Like looking at the artwork that you do, for me, it's like, it's very colorful, but there's also like a classic retro vibe that kind of throws back to some of these. I kind of talked to like Wes Anderson has a very refined like palette that's, it's almost grainy without being grainy. And I think the things to notice from looking at when it does feel like a comic book, like a classic, there's a love letter to the 60 plus years of comic book history in there. And that's the vibe that I definitely get from your work for sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, what I love just letting my brain saturate in all of these influence and then wipe it clean and see what happens. Like, I'm not intentionally trying to make it pull from one place or the other. I'm just, whatever my experience and like influences are, just come out in an organic way of what I want to see page. It's been a lot of fun. It's my favorite job I've ever had.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, before we let you go, one final pitch for anybody that does not already have this ordered in their pull list for April 3rd. Minor Threats, The Fastest Way Down. Why should we, the comic audience, go out to the shops and go get this book?
It picks up where the last one left off, but it's also a good entry point, which is it continues to examine the world of super villainy, but now we get to see Frankie rise to power, and it's her struggle to maintain it. And there's a lot of issues from volume 1 that follow her, some demons, some new characters that we have the action, which is a kind of shitty Teen Titans, I guess is the best way to pitch them.
That's exactly what they are, shitty Teen Titans.
They're shitty Teen Titans who buying the store Rain Tease and Frankie have sold about the death of the Insomniac. So there's a big mystery of who really killed the Insomniac. Threatens to unravel everything that Frankie's built. There's new relationships. There's a romance that we don't want to spoil. And it's Scott just being pushed further and drawing the hell out of this book. And it feels big while still being very and Frankie's story. And there are just sequences that I think are going to blow people away if they did in the first one, from the time bubble where he did that page that looked like a game board, the page of Scalpel looking inside Frankie and being diagnosed by her organs of what's wrong, all that stuff. I think Scott has just hit the park.
However, put it this way, however far you think Frankie will go to hang on to power, she goes way farther. Can imagine. So just leave it at that.
That is saying something, because if you've read Minor Threats Volume 1, which you should, there's no excuse it should not be in your collection, is out via trade paperback right now via Dark Horse Comics. And you should also pick up the alternates too. After reading those stories, there's no way that you can't be excited to go get this in your pull list on April 3rd. Minor Threats, The Fastest Way Down, #1. You definitely want to have it because we're going to be talking about it on Nerd Initiative social media. Trust me about that. In fact, I think we're going to be doing a little turn of page preview episode when we deep dive into Volume 1 for last week of March there. So stay tuned for that. So definitely want
Lauren talk about it weekly too. Lauren has been reading these books, and on our show, she's the one that got me turned on to it before we even booked this interview. Was
Lauren?
Yeah, raving about it, and it didn't take me 4 years like it took me to watch Supernatural. Big ups to Lauren.
No, Lauren has been championing
Old Man Logan, and I even mailed you the first trade back.
Look, that's the 5th year. We're doing this show for
until
years,
July
so.
26th.
But no, yeah. Thank you to Lauren for turning me on to this book because I'm glad she did. Then thank you guys for creating something so badass, man. Seriously.
Yeah. No, Lauren.
Thanks for letting us come on your show.
Gosh, of course.
Oh, thank you. Please come back on too. After this book comes out, we definitely have to talk some deep dive into this one.
All right, we'll come back and we'll talk about volume 2 for sure.
Yes, thank you.
Wraps.
So, like I say, the information to order this book will be in the liner notes, as well as links to follow all three creators on the social medias, because you definitely should. And when this book comes out, definitely hit us up on nerdinitiative.com and let us know what you think about it. But trust me, you're not going to want to miss this when it drops. And definitely, I want to thank our guests for coming through, Jordan, Patton, and Scott. Thank Matt and Lauren. Obviously, you catch them each and every week on hopsgeeknews and on nerdinitiative.com, where we kick off new comic book day coverage every Tuesday and Wednesday, 8 or 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for new comic book day reviews and so much more. I've been your host, Ken M., and we'll end it like we do on Turn a Page, as we always do. When you have a great issue in your hands, such as Minor Threats, the fastest way down, #1, and you see somebody struggling at the comic shops to find something, hand yours off to them. Tell them to turn a page. We'll see you next time.